Hi everyone. Hope I'm audible and visible as well.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for joining today. Very warm welcome to today's session. And we are delighted to have so many of you with us today for this evening. It will be a fascinating conversation, as you know, exploring how science, sport, and the power of reading can help us build healthier, more resilient, and more fulfilling lives. My name is Arnisha, and I work as a manager with the Digital Library, British Council Digital Library team. Before we begin, I would like to share a few housekeeping reminders. This session is being conducted, and the mic will be switched off during the session. At the end of the day, at the end of the session, there'll be a Q&A where you will have a chance to raise your hand and ask questions. We will unmute your mic that time. We have a live Q&A session at the end. And please feel free to post your questions in the chat at any time during the session. If you experience any technical difficulties during the session, you can also post your questions in the Q&A section of this session. The chat option will be switched off during the session, but the Q&A option is open. Uh, now it's my pleasure to invite David Knox, Director, Cultural Engagement South Asia at the British Council, who will be moderating today's conversation and introducing our distinguished speakers today. Over to you, David. Welcome to today's session.
Thank you very much, Anisha. And let me add a very warm British Council welcome to our authors and to you, our audience. Looking forward to a very engaging conversation on the longevity code. Something I have a personal interest in as someone a little older in years, but young at heart. The British Council is celebrating the National Year of Reading in 2026. We champion reading as a powerful way to spark curiosity, inspire lifelong learning, and connect people through ideas and culture. It's also World Youth Skills Day on the 15th of July, and the act of celebrating authors and books reminds us that building lifelong skills, including resilience, well-being, and continuous learning, are essential for us all at all ages. The event comes to you from the British Council Digital Library, which is available in 30 countries, and it's a home to a growing population of 190,000 members worldwide. And I think there is absolutely something for everyone, whether you're looking for ebooks, magazines, newspapers, films, learning materials, whether those learning materials are for professional development, academic growth, or lifelong learning. There's something for every academic discipline, every form of professional development learning. There's also lots of quality entertainment materials there too. So please continue to explore and enjoy our digital library. At the heart of the library is curating and showcasing UK knowledge and creativity and culture. Alongside our collection, we have events such as these, author conversations, book discussions, and orientation. And we hope these inspire curiosity, encourage learning, and importantly, create connections. Today is one of those events which brings together cutting-edge science and elite sport. A question for us all: how can we not only live longer, but live healthier, stronger, and more fulfilling lives? Your book, Sophia, The Longevity Code, combines research on healthy aging with practical lessons drawn from high-performance sport, insights into building resilience, well-being, and lasting vitality. I'm going to introduce our two speakers. At the moment, we have just the one, Sophia, Dr. Sophia Pathai. Let me start with an introduction for her. with her, and hopefully her colleague and co-author Pullela Gopichand will join us shortly, and I will introduce him when he comes to the call. So Dr. Sophie Pathai is firstly a British Indian medical doctor with a PhD in the biology of aging. She studied at the University College London and at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Her research was amongst the first to identify biological markers of accelerated aging in diverse populations. She's led global medical teams, including AbbVie and at Johnson & Johnson, and is currently working advancing longevity innovation in the Gulf. The Longevity Code is Sophia's first book, and it, as I say, it combines cutting-edge science and real-world insight into building resilience, improving health span, to help us live not just longer, but live better. So without further ado, and Anisha, can I just ask you to flag when Gopi joins us, because then I'll do the introductions for him. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation. And I guess there's an opening question, which is really the fact that you both come from these different worlds of longevity science and elite sport. What inspired you to write this book together, and what do you hope that readers will take away from it?
Well, hi, David, and hello to everyone who's joined. And thank you very much, British Council, for making this happen today. But, I think what's really interesting is that, Gopichand and I come from two very different worlds, right? I'm a physician scientist. I spent years on the wards as a doctor, in the operating room as a surgeon, and in the research lab. And Gopichand spent, years either as elite athlete himself and sportsman, and developing, the future generations of sports people and athletes. So I think, what we realize is we're looking at the same topic from opposing diameters. And what we realized is we're both looking at the fundamental question of how do humans build resilience and really optimize for, acting as their best version of themselves throughout their life. And I think what we realized is that, as a physician, I'm often looking for disease, right? And I'm thinking about problems and solving problems, because I'm willing to bet that nearly anyone on the call here today hasn't gone to a doctor unless they've had a problem, right? So we're always thinking from a problem sort of oriented solution. Whereas in elite sport, and through my conversations with Gopi, we realized that, sports, and particularly elite sport, is thinking about how to prevent a decline in performance very early on. So I'm looking at resilience from the problem side, and he's looking at resilience from the behavior and building side. And so that's really became the foundation for the book. How do we build resilience? And, the book's called The Longevity Code, but we're not talking about longevity in the sense of, can you live to 100 or 110 or 150? The real ethos of the book, and I think our common philosophy, is how do you ensure that the years we do live are filled with purpose, impact, and healthy living?
Thank you. Let me carry on with some questions directed to you. The book is grounded in the latest research on healthy aging. What do you think are the most important scientific insights that you felt every reader should understand?
Well, there's a lot of science in the book. I mean, certainly anyone who has read it or is going to read it will find that, I'm not making an apology for the level of science that's in there, because I think that's foundational. But if I think from, first principles, there are probably three sort of grounding philosophies or concepts. I would say the first is that aging is not one process, right? It's, it's the lowering of resilience across multiple biological domains. And I think that's what's really important, because, people often talk about biohacking or, treatments for aging. there is not going to be, I don't believe, one drug, for example, that cures aging in the overall sense, right? There are multiple processes going on, and we talk about that in the book. So that's the first domain. The second is that, you know, aging is far more malleable than we often think it is. So people often talk about their genes, right? And they say, well, I can't do anything, it's my genetic makeup. What I would argue is that actually, yes, your genes certainly set the scene, right? But it's the behaviors and the habits that we cultivate that actually write the script. So we do have an opportunity to have agency over our aging biology. And third, the principle that I think about, for the book is that habits do compound. And if they are good habits, or less good habits, right? So chronic disease, for example, diabetes or high blood pressure, it's not an on or off switch. These often happen due to cumulative changes in the body. And the same thing goes for behaviors. It's the behaviors we do ourselves, like maybe going to the gym every day or being thoughtful about what we eat every day, that have that cumulative effect over time. And we certainly see that in elite sport as well.
Thank you. I mean, that's a very hopeful message. One of the key ideas in the longevity code is that longevity is about more than simply living longer. Could you explain what health span means and why it's central to the book?
Yeah, I think, you know, everyone is nowadays talking about longevity. And I think I use my mother as a good litmus test of this, because she's always sending me articles that she comes across, in the general media about longevity. And that's definitely exploded, I would say, over the last 5 to 6 years. But I think longevity, when people talk about it in that very loose term, they're thinking about lifespan, which is actually the number of years on the clock, right? The number of years you are living according to your passport. But health span is a different concept. And let me bring that to life. Imagine there are two people at the age of 90. And we probably know these kind of people, in our lives through our families or friends. One 90-year-old may have spent the last 20 years with multiple medical problems, and perhaps has limited movement and mobility, is in and out of hospitals, and not functioning in a physical or mental sense that feels joyful. On the other hand, we probably all know of folks who are in their 90s who are, still playing golf, going on holidays, lifting up grandchildren, meeting up with friends, going for a dance, right? So that difference, that life with, I would say, purpose, impact, and good health, that's a life with health span. So health span is those years with good health. And I think it's a really important concept for us to think about, far more than lifespan. And what we are seeing in India, but across the world, is that the health span gap is increasing. And so the life expectancy of people, the lifespan of many people in India might be around the late 60s to the 70s, but actually there are often 10 years where people are not living in good health, and that's the health span gap. And people might think, oh, okay, it's in certain parts of the world we expect that, but actually in the USA and in Europe to some extent, we also see this health span gap starting to widen. And that's why the concept of health span over lifespan is central to the book and central to our ethos, I think, of living and aging in a healthy way.
Thank you. And it, I guess, links back to your point about agency and the habits that compound the better outcomes for that health span.
Absolutely.
As you've translated these complex scientific research into the book for a general audience, what was the biggest challenge in making the science accessible without oversimplifying it?
David, I think this is one of the big challenges for scientists and for doctors. And I've noticed that I've seen many doctors joining the call today. So hello to all my colleagues. I think, we're taught to communicate in a specific language, right?
Mm.
You know, when you're a medical student, you learn ways of talking or abbreviations that help you communicate to other doctors. And as scientists, we do this as well. There's a certain way of talking about, you know, presenting data or results, and we publish these in science journals. And I think readers of the longevity code, you know, it should be, I really, my wish and hope is that everyone can get a takeaway from this book. And so what I've realized, even as a medical student, is that we all resonate with a story. And so, for example, when I was a medical student, if I had to learn 10 causes of, I don't know, liver failure, for example, I could probably learn them, but I would forget them eventually. Whereas if I'd been on the wards and I'd seen a patient with a problem with their liver and gone through that story of the patient, what were the problems, what was the potential diagnosis, and what was the treatment, I could tell you to this day, maybe 25 years since I graduated, I could still recount that story. So I think what's really fundamental, and probably you would agree being in the communication field yourself, is that by building stories, this can really help us to convey the science behind that. And I'm really grateful to Gervin Chudder at Penguin, our editor, because she really encouraged us to build stories into the science. So what you'll see in the book is that, you know, across every chapter, we start with the science and the foundations, because I think that is critical to our understanding. And Gopichand certainly weighs in with his lived experience, which I think adds that dimension that people and readers can hold on to. And what we also created were this sort of concept called a code creator. And these are actually, you know, folks that we've come across who live these examples of healthy longevity and healthy aging. And I, at the risk of embarrassing them, but I think two of our co-creators might even be on the call today. One is Roshan and one is Ruby. And we do, you know, we talk about what they've been doing to embrace their healthy longevity journey. For example, being mindful in the morning about how we wake up, what we do in the morning in terms of movement, what we might eat, but also thinking about how we maintain social connectedness, or how we, you know, use movement or scenery to keep our purpose and impact and joy going. So I think it's that combination of having a foundation of science, but then building it with a story that then people can either relate to and or resonate with as well. So I think that was a challenge, but also opportunity for us in the book.
Thank you. Well, everything you've shared so far has been very easily grasped by me, and I don't consider myself to have a scientific, well, I won't say scientific bone in my body, that's probably inaccurate, but thank you. As you were writing in the writing process, were there any scientific findings that genuinely surprised you or changed the way you think about healthy aging?
I thought when I was, you know, sort of writing the deep science for the book that, you know, we're at this really exciting time in society, right, where we've got advances in biotechnology. Of course, I'm going to talk about the, you know, the wonderful and challenging sometimes use of artificial intelligence and large language models, and also thinking about how we're embracing so many different technologies when it comes to medicine and science. So I thought, well, there are any number of topics we could talk about, and there is a chapter indeed on the kind of advancements in health span science. And, you know, the drugs we talk about might include what are known as the GLP-1 agonists, right? The ones that people commonly use nowadays for initially for diabetes and now for weight loss, which many people seem to be using. And we certainly touched upon these therapies in the book. But David, what I actually found, you know, sort of most surprising to me was that actually it's the centuries of wisdom that have really science is now confirming. And sort of to bring that to life, I think, you know, India is a great kind of ambassador and poster child of healthy living, right? Because if you think about the Indian diet across the country, if you think about movement and yoga, if you think about thinking about the mindfulness that exists in Indian society, I think all of this social connectedness, you and I were talking earlier, just before the webinar, about cross-generational communication and living, right? I think all of these themes are central to healthy longevity. Healthy longevity isn't, you know, some people think it's biohacking and taking all the latest drugs, or, you know, using all the latest wearables. Sure, you can do that if you want to, but actually what's the foundational principles are pretty simple and can be democratized. And I think that's what I found, you know, most surprising, is that science is confirming the wisdom that has been around for centuries.
Thank you. Well, again, a very encouraging and empowering sense of learning from collective wisdom and cultural practice. Let me go back to my question set. Sorry, I'm shuffling between papers. Throughout the book, the science and the lived experience, Gopichand and your characters, Roshan and Ruby, complement one another. How did you decide which stories and research would best illustrate your key messages?
Mm. Again, I want to thank Gervin and Yash, our editors at Penguin, because they really helped to encourage that level of storytelling. So I think, you know, for every chapter around the key topics in healthy longevity, which are essentially thinking about our mind, and not just sort of mental resilience, but also cognitive health, and how we keep our brain healthy and agile. When we think about metabolism and diet, and, you know, what we put in our body is as important as you know, what we take out. And then about movement, I think for each of these chapters we really try to be very structured in presenting the science, but then thinking about what would be the key areas that a reader might find as a takeaway. Because I think for me, if I'm reading the book, or even when I was a student, or even now as someone who is a continuous student, when I want to think about some information, I'll give you an example. The topic of chrononutrition, right? So that is when you eat can be as important as what you eat. So we gave a sort of code creator story about, you know, someone who was sort of very, you know, a corporate person, very high flying, and probably there are people like this on the call today who do a lot of travel for work. And it's like, how do you know then when to eat and what you should be eating and how to balance that? But that's just one example. You know, someone who's doing that kind of role. Equally, it could be a shift worker or a busy mother, right? Or a busy parent. What could they hold on to in terms of something that would resonate with them? And so that's how we built out these stories, to really think about what the science is, but then again, as you mentioned, what the lived experience would be that would make this person think, aha, that relates to me. Another example, when we talked about the concept of, which I personally find very engaging, neuroaesthetics, right? This is the idea that when we look at something that is beautiful, maybe that's art, maybe that's going to a park, it actually makes us feel good and better. And we know that that can improve our healthy aging. And so one of the code creator stories was around a young lady who was a kind of, you know, social media sort of enthusiast, and had taken a new role in a company, and had just got a bit bogged down with the stress of life and the stress of, you know, a new role and maybe living away from home for the first time. And what she found is that by taking, you know, just time out in the evening to walk back and, you know, see the sunset, or seeing a nice piece of art at a weekend, actually helped to reframe her stress and the way she perceived, you know, her role and how she could contribute. So I think it's just thinking about, everyone will have, you know, we all live these experiences. So how could we place it in a way that allowed someone to feel, okay, that is me, or that's someone I know, and then to take away that lesson. Because when you think about it from a story perspective, you're far more likely to understand and then implement maybe any behaviors and habits thereafter.
Thank you. Well, you've resonated there with me, and I've now got a new way to describe it. I've got the neuroaesthetics. Last night I returned after just a slightly stressful day in London I got home in time to have a little run across the fields behind where I live, and as you say, witness the sunset, do something good for my body, but also that being in nature to see a small deer bounce across the field. Um,
And how did it
yeah.
make you feel? I bet after that you felt a whole lot better, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Because
managed
that's a
to feel
prescription
it.
in itself, right? To do that. And we don't realize that these are very simple things to do. But, you don't go to a doctor with saying, you wouldn't go with that complaint. Oh, it's been a busy week. What shall I do? But the prescription actually is to get out and see the sunset or see something beautiful in nature, right? So we don't realize that the prescriptions are very often in our hands.
Yeah, and I mean, I look forward to having time to read the book and making time to read the book to find these stories and these practices because, as you say, they are within reach.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
just to move on, and we're slightly limited by having one side of the story so far. But during the writing process, were there areas and ideas or perspectives that you initially disagreed on, but eventually found common ground?
Mm. I think we both learnt a lot from each other during this process. And I think, as we mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, we were approaching the same topic, but from different
Mm,
starting points, right? And I think so where we found areas for discussion or for really, thinking about how to format the chapter was probably because I was approaching it from a biological perspective.
mm,
The cells, we need to think about these hallmarks of aging that happens in cells or in tissues or in organs.
mm.
And Gopi would say, well, that's great. And you're right, he's not here to give his side of the story, but I think he would say the same. But his perception or perspective would be to think about the behavior. And
Mhm,
so, you can have as much biology as going on as you want, but if someone's not going to change or there's not going to be a behavioral change, the biology is not going to change. So I think it was when we were able to bring that commonality together, that's
mm,
when the stories and the writing became much richer. And I'll give you an example. There's a chapter, of course, on diet and what we eat. And
mm,
it's far more than just eat vegetables or eat protein. We really were very thoughtful about you know why should you
mm,
care so much about what you eat. And I was trying to write about it from a very sort of scientific perspective. And I think there's a wonderful part in that chapter where Gopi just says, he's been an athlete for all his life, and maybe 20 years ago, he was, the guidance was to eat toast and jam for breakfast before you went and played. And even see your face is like crinkling there a little bit because
yeah,
we realize now that's not the
mm.
food of champions, right? It's nice to have toast and jam. I love it, but you probably don't want to be having that in the morning when you're about to play a very
Mm,
important championship game. But
mm,
that was the kind of learning at that time.
yeah.
But then he realized he was very thoughtful about how it made him feel. He then, as the knowledge and thinking changed, he adapted his diet and he actually not only felt better, he also performed better. And that ties in directly then to the science, right, of
Mm,
why we should, we fuel up with protein in the morning, for example, rather than a very rich sugar and carbohydrate diet. So I think it was that blending of biology and behavior that made the
mm.
conversation much richer. And we had, I think rather than disagreements, they were just fantastic discussions, right, between two people with a shared vision and bringing their experience together for the book.
Sounds like a really exciting and
It was
dynamic
fun.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fun, absolutely. Um, the book encourages readers to rethink aging and well-being. What assumptions do you hope readers will challenge after reading the Longevity Code?
I think the biggest hope I have for any reader is to really realize that, we do have agency over our aging. Aging is not a passive process that is just happening to you. You know, it's something that you can have a level of influence and control over. So I think that, you know, that's the first thing. And I think secondly is that readers realize that aging or thinking about aging is not something you think about when you're 40 or 50 or 60. Actually, it's something we should be thinking about, you know, from childhood. And I think in some ways this is a larger societal question, right? Because if we, even at medical school, and I trained between the years of 1994 to 2000, we didn't talk about the biology of aging. Everything was about disease, right? As doctors, you know, we're supposed to be talking about keeping people healthy. All I learned was about how to treat disease. So I think there's a societal question where we need to think about what, you know, when do people start thinking about how to age well? And it's not a discussion about, you know, just simply aging. It's about how to live well. And I think the third, you know, sort of key takeaway I would have, actually, I'm going to sort of steal with glee a comment which a very respected and dear friend said to me, who's not a scientist and not a doctor, but actually said to me, you know, that good health span is not having simply a preserved body, right? Where, you know, we strive to have no wrinkles or have the body of a 20-year-old. It's not about that. It's actually about living, a health span is about living with vitality and joy and capacity, having that ability to form great connections, to have a great sense of community spirit, to have a purpose and impact and joy in what you do, so that when you do get to your 90s, you feel like, you know what, oh my goodness, what an extraordinary life that was. I think, you know, he just coined that so well. And I think that's really the ethos of the book. And I think my philosophy as well.
Well, that's lovely. I can relate. I think kind of aesthetically, rather obviously, I've had hair loss, which is, you know, something I could have worried about, but never have. Of course, my Indian family say that it makes me either healthy or wise, and obviously I lie and say it's both. Um, but anyway, moving back to your questions. So. Um, you've talked quite a lot about the exchange between yourself and Gopi in the process. Um, what did you learn from the others' expertise that influenced your thinking beyond the book?
Um, I think, well, I'm just trying to see if I think Gopichand's trying to join the call.
Ah,
So Anisha, I'm going to send you his details. Perhaps you could just let him know.
Sure, sure.
There we are. I just sent them to you. So maybe you could just either ring him or message him because he's trying to call me. So maybe we can get him online.
Sure.
I'll speak for him now, and then he can probably share what he's learned as well. I learned from Gopi, you know, really a sense of not being too hard on myself, which was very freeing. You know, he's obviously reached the top echelons of sportsmanship and you know, elite performance, and he doesn't take himself too seriously. He's if he go he'll be the first to say that if he's at a buffet and it's in the book and there's something he really wants to eat, he does, right? So he lives with purpose and joy and intent. And I think that's a great example of, you know, for us, for all of us, that someone who is, you know, at the pinnacle of elite sport and to continue to train the future generations, you know, understands what it means to be kind to oneself. So that for me was a big learning. Whereas I've always, you know, as I think as a physician, been kind of very used to like rote learning and protocol following and doing everything the way I should do. So that was a big learning for me. Ah, here he is.
and a very warm welcome to you, Gopi. And now perhaps got some context for some of your challenges in joining us. It looks like you may be on the move. Let me give you an introduction, if I can find my notes. So Gopi is one of India's most respected sports leaders, a pioneer in high performance coaching, an All England champion, chief national coach of the Indian badminton badminton side. You've coached multiple Olympic medalists. You've reshaped the nation's sporting mindset with a philosophy of discipline, resilience, and balance. Honours include the Padma Bhushan, Padma Shri, and Dronacharya Awards, redefining athlete well-being and human potential. It's your first book with Dr. Sophia Pathai, writing about sports and science in the pursuit of vitality, purpose, and enduring performance. We've sort of focused on a lot of questions on Sophia, so I'll come to a few for you, and then we'll open up, I think, in the last little bit for some questions from the audience. So your contribution to the book is shaped by decades in elite sport and coaching. Which lessons from your coaching journey did you feel were most essential to include in the longevity code?
First of all, thank you very much for the kind words. For me, I think when I met Sophia, it was like there was so much of things in common, although we came from totally different fields. And also, it was a journey for me through my own experience in the badminton field, the mistakes I've done, and the things which I thought were absolutely right, but which turned out over passage of time that took a toll on my own health. And the pursuit for excellence and going through the grind was not necessarily the best thing. And when you train and are with young kids and who are really burning themselves, empathy is something which you and compassion to people and also to your own decisions, because I was very hard on myself all the time. And as an athlete, that's something which you do. You're very critical of your performance. But somewhere down the line, it's also important to be compassionate. And I think these things were very important in my journey. And for me, um, I think my contribution, I think the very little contribution, honestly, I think all of it is the work of Sophia. But for me, I think the context is I just see people making simple mistakes, in the sense a little bit of strength training, a little bit of movement, a little better sleep, a little better thought, I think make a huge difference. And compounded over time, these are fundamentally the biggest things. And it's very different for very different people. And fitness as a journey is also very different for different people. And I think more than anything, I think to look at it from a very forgiving perspective is what I would say has been my own journey.
Thank you. Well, I contest that it's all Sophia's work, and I don't belittle her contribution, but I think she's expressed very warmly how the two your collaboration has brought together the two sides, and how science reinforces the um, insights that you've shared from your life's journey in sport. So those little fixes, overcoming some of those simple mistakes you've described. Um, and that brings me to my next question. The book highlights discipline and consistency rather than quick fixes. Why do you believe these qualities are so important for living healthier, more purposeful lives?
I think compounding small improvements over time is fundamentally the most important thing. And we start off on a journey of wanting to do big things, and then we fall off. And I would call it normally the leakage of um desire, or the leakage of putting your goal in front, and then you kind of find food on the way, you find exercise a little difficult on the way, sleep a little tighter on the way. I think these are fundamentally the most important things. And we want to do a lot of good things for some time and then fall off later. So in my own journey, I would say it's okay, in the sense we all would fail, but it's, I think, important that we stick to a routine which is sustainable, which actually I could decide to skip a meal. But is it sustainable if the whole family is eating together? So how do you make a routine which is easier to follow, which is possible, that you can do it over long periods of time? And what are the decisions which make this possible? I think from that perspective, when I look, discipline is one of the key components. And I think small improvements over long periods of time or sticking to routine, I think is far more important than anything else, which is short term and which is a quick fix.
Thank you. I think that's what I'm taking away from both of you, this sense of the agency we have to make changes in our lives to improve our health span. Um, Many readers, myself included, are not athletes. How does the book make the principles of elite performance relevant to everyday life?
I For me, I think elite performance is pretty much the same. Marginal improvements in everything. So when I get an athlete who's come back from a tournament, all I'm saying is, okay, what do you need to do? Let's break it down. I want to win as a common thing, but it doesn't have any meaning. I want to improve as a common thing, but if it's not measurable, it's not going to be done. So you break it down into factors, and whether it's the game, whether it's your forehand, your backhand, your smash, your drop, your toss, or whether it's your motor qualities of endurance, strength, and flexibility, and or your mind, which is tactical, technical areas, or emotional strength on court. I think, how do you make that stronger? And each box needs to improve. And what are the strategies you're using to each box? I think that's the basic thing. And you would want to do this, and then you go back and you fail again, and you come back to the drawing board and you start off again with the enthusiasm of a child. And that's all the pursuit is. And as an athlete, that's something which I would really want people to bring to their lives: the purpose, the focus, and the breaking down of the goals, so that you have a perspective which is very clear. If I need to be healthier, I need to do these things on my diet. I need to do these things on my movement or sleep or my mental well-being, my breathing. And this is the strategy which I'll use, and this is how it will help. I think that's the kind of focus which I think, and with enthusiasm is what athletes do. And I would really love people have that kind of an enthusiasm for the healthy lifespan they're aspiring for.
Thank you. I think this point comes across very strongly from you both about breaking these habits down into everyday choices and actions. Um, Looking back at the stories you've shared in the book, was there one personal experience that best captures the message you wanted readers to remember?
Sophia, you want to go on this?
I think, well, or please, we can both share, because I've already had some time to kind of talk on my own. So, but I think one of them, I was talking about your experience, Gopi, where you discussed before about your diets and how before, it was sort of toast and jam at one point, right? And then you learned through, the way you feel, and then how science backed up that actually changed your performance and your perspective. So for me, that was a really resonant point personally.
Yeah, I think for- I've tried everything, literally everything. And sometimes um, uh, the body just reacts, and you have to see what's happening. And I think to believe in science totally at the moment was not really the right thing. But at a time when we were playing, carb loading was the thing. And we were fully loading ourselves. By the time I finished my career, I was um, borderline insulin sensitive. And then things were looking very bad, borderline diabetes kind of a thing. And then I needed to revamp everything and look at myself clearly, and then things changed. So I think each one's journey, and even in each one's journey, I think different times in different times of your life, I think things are different. So you need to be aware of what's happening. And I would say awareness would be a key element in the entire journey.
Thank you. So I'm going to just finish with a couple of questions about reading, because we conduct these events within the frame of the National Year of Reading. And I'm curious to know, how has reading shaped your personal and professional journey? And why do you believe it remains one of the most powerful tools for lifelong learning?
For me, so how if you can relate to this, but I'll still share my experience. So when I was young, studying was my the reason why I studied was that it would allow me to play. I had a strict mother, so mother would say if you get uh, 60% mark in class, then you were allowed to play. So that the only reason for me to study was that I could play. And I still, in India, especially in South India where I live, I think the only subjects which we were doing at that point of time were maths, physics, and chemistry or biology. Either you're a doctor or a engineer. And to add to my problems, my brother went to one of the premier institutes in India for engineering. So standards at home for engineering were pretty high. So I wrote my exams. I didn't do very well. But when I finished my final exam, I kind of literally put my pen down on the paper and said, never again in my life I'm going to study anything, because I hated reading and studying. A few years later, when I started to um, wanted to improve, then I just thought it was so important. Then for me, to read in Hindi, uh, the national language, or the regional, my own mother tongue, which was Telugu, was never a pleasure. And picked up books. Picked up anything and everything I could under the sun, and I kept reading. I was a voracious reader for many years, and I think that is something which changed me personally. And I think some of whatever I am is thanks to the knowledge which I picked up. And back in the day, just to put things in perspective, I had an ACL tear and about 4 surgeries when I was playing. And these were times when television was not there as much, and also the phones and internet was not there. So reading was what we would do. We would have a train journey from Hyderabad to Delhi, where my doctor was, and that used to be a 27 hours journey. So just would take a bunch of books and just keep reading all through. And I think reading is such an important medium, and I think it's something which I have learned it the other way,
Mm.
having somebody who wanted to reject reading at all, and who was afraid, or if who was scared of studies. But I think to a point where I really loved and researched and wanted to read, and I just read a whole lot of books. And I think it's supremely important to for building people's characters.
Thank you so much for that, and a word of encouragement, perhaps for parents in our audience who may be struggling with their younger family members, to instill that habit that's obviously come to you a little bit later. Anything else from you, Sophia, on that question of reading and the part it played in your life?
Well, I think this highlights why the collaboration between Gopichand and I has been, so fruitful and energizing, because we've arrived at the same point through different journeys. And so I have my mother, who's actually from born and raised in Mumbai, to thank for my reading habit. She really encouraged my brother and I to read, and we grew up in sort of in Hertfordshire, which is a county outside of London, as you probably know, David. And I always remember we moved house once, and as we moved into the house, she'd left new books for us to read in my new study in my new bedroom. So it was always this idea that reading could open doors, and reading for me was a way of getting more than just information. It was a way of accessing different cultures or communities, or even across centuries, right? It was a way of, or sometimes escape. And I think I'm probably a romantic at heart as well. And I always felt that, by reading literature, I could escape sometimes what was sometimes my brother and I grew up in a town where we were maybe the only Asian kids for many years, and it gave me an avenue to explore different ways of thinking and how people live. And I think what I realized, of course, at medical school, you are mandated to read a lot of textbooks. But what I learned then was that reading, it doesn't need to be about finishing books. It actually it's about reading outside of your field. And what I've learned lately, I would say in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, is I derive a lot of joy from reading outside medicine. So I think when I was an intern or a trainee, all my time went either on practicing my craft as a doctor or a surgeon, or reading on that very topic. And what I found after that is I gave myself the opportunity to read books I might not ordinarily read, right? Around, finance, or around different aspects of science, or even sport. And I think that really helped to widen my perspective. So I think what I'm trying to say in summary is that reading in many ways is a kind of longevity invention, in the sense that it doesn't simply extend longevity, but it certainly extends our perspective, and that's why it's so important.
Wow, thank you. I'm sort of looking to my colleagues online who are responsible for our digital library. I hope we are recording this. We could clip that and use it, really, both your contributions as promotional material for the value of reading in all its forms and fields. Thank you so much. I'm going to kind of pass over my moderation responsibility to give us time for audience interaction. We've got people from around the world, and Anisha, I think it's over to you to give our listeners and participants around the world a chance to come into the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the session, David. It was very brilliantly moderated by you. So we have a couple of questions already, audience. You can raise your hand. Maybe we're almost on time, and I can take one question maybe from the chat and one from you. So I'll go with the chat questions first. Loading for me. Yeah. So so we have a question from Tania here. Social media is full of advice about the importance of getting sleep, and more often than not, it sets standard. Example, 8 hours of minimum sleep we require, right? That do not apply to all people for all ages. Don't these standards often make people feel inadequate or helpless about fitting them or reaching for them? Does your book address this issue? We'll go to Gopichand first.
Yeah, I think yes, I think a lot of work on sleep has been spoken, and I think Sophia is somebody who actually believes sleep is supremely important, and it's a foundation. For me as an athlete, and looking at myself over time, I've realized that when I was playing, about 10 hours of sleep is what we would do. And I would be really tired. And that is what. And over time, it's moved for me, varied over time. And today, about 6 to 7 hours is what I tend to do. But I also, if I'm not sleeping well, then I tend to do some yoga nidra, progressive relaxation, because that helps for me. So it's another 40 minutes which I add in. I have to admit that with sport and me still managing to do a lot of physical activity on the field, my body hurts. So sometimes it's not the greatest thing when you get to bed and your body is hurting, so you can't sleep very well. So my thinking would be that it's very important that even if you get up in the midnight, I think don't get up, don't put on the light, don't get your phone on. I think it's important that you just get back to sleep, and that's something which I try and focus on, and it helps. But overall, sleep is very critical. I think Sophia can add on uh, more on this subject.
Yeah, well, firstly, Tanya, thank you for this question. I think you've raised a really important topic, which is that social media creates this standard, which I think is unattainable for nearly everyone. I look at social media all the time and I think, gosh, I can't do all the things that these influencers do. So I think the first thing is to recognize that they're creating a standard which is in some ways not tenable or even attainable. I think what's really important, and we do highlight this in the book, is to think about what are the changes that you can make for yourself. So we don't know your personal circumstances, and neither do we need to, because what I will tell you right now is what are the small changes that you can make. There, I know for myself, it would be, can I maybe either go to bed half an hour earlier, and that becomes something I implement as a habit, right? And you do that over days, that compounds, as we said, over time. Or are there things I can do related to, as Gopi mentioned as well, my sleep hygiene? And by that, I don't mean clean sheets or pillows, although maybe that's part of it. But what I mean is before going to sleep, turning off not having time with your phone, making sure that the environment is cool, right? Making sure that you have given yourself that time to compress. I mean, if you think about your laptop or any computer that you use, it's really hot and then you just suddenly shut it and that's it. What are you doing to your brain, right? So these little changes that you can do will help you over time. And if you're a junior doctor or someone earlier in your career, or you're a busy parent, maybe your sleep is not going to be optimal, but there are little things you can do, and that's going to stand you in instead far better than any social influencer is telling you. So create your own standards and then make those incremental changes.
Thank you, Gopichand. Thank you, Sophia, for answering that. We'll take one last question from Tariq. Tariq, we have unmuted your mic. You can speak now. Tariq, you can ask your question.
Hi, I'm Tariq. First, I'll say that this seems to be a privilege to listen to you, to the authors. You don't get this opportunity, very often. Um, I'm really motivated to read this book. I'm myself now 64, and what else I'll be doing other than finding the longevity code? Uh, just one thought in my mind. Living in this part of world in subcontinent, and especially from where I belong to, we have loads of external factors which not only affect us physically, but also to our mental health. And I can realize this difference because lately I have been visiting United Kingdom and to spend some of my summertime there, and then I can really see that difference. Just think of the pollution we have to go through, the smog, and many of such factors, and then so many external factors which disturb you mentally. I mean, you know them, I'm sure. Does this book also address these factors? How we can navigate them? And before I end my question, I must say I'm really happy to see Mr. Gopichand. It's just a privilege to really see and hear this wonderful athlete. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my question.
Thank you. Gopichand, will you go first to answer Mr. Tariq?
Yeah, I think this is more. I think Sophia could answer this better.
Thank you. Over to you, Sophia.
Well, firstly, Tariq, thank you for your question. And maybe I can answer this from two perspectives, because you just mentioned being in the UK and thinking about how that perhaps felt like a different way from a kind of mental perspective. Well, firstly, the book does tackle this, but what I would say is that your perspective is shaped by your environment. And I grew up in the UK and I've spent a long time there. And yes, there are the expo zone, which is something we talk about, right? The environment and how it shapes your overall healthy longevity. We certainly talk about this in the book. And yes, England maybe has less pollution. It has, in some parts, rolling green hills and a lot of natural beauty, for sure. At the same time, there are many things about the UK that can definitely impact your mental health and your mental resilience. So it's always a balance. And I think of my time in the subcontinent. Yes, the challenges that you've explained, Tariq, do exist, of course. At the same time, I can think of the absolute joy I've had when I've met family members over a big dinner together, or I've gone out for a kulfi on a hot day and it's felt amazing, or I've just gone to have a cup of chai and I realize I couldn't do that in London, but I can certainly do that at a tea stall in Mumbai or in Hyderabad, right? So it's all about, I think, finding joy in those moments, and that can be anywhere in the world, quite frankly. And I think what we just need to do is recognize that these moments can occur, and to harness the joy out of them. And of course, there will be things like pollution or differing perspectives that do ultimately impact us in some way, but we should hold on to that greater feeling of finding the joy wherever we can. If we seek it, we will find it.
Yes, Sophia. And with that, we come to the end of the session today. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our wonderful speakers, Dr. Sophia Pathai and Pullela Gopichand, for sharing such thoughtful insights and inspiring us with your perspectives on healthy aging, sport, and the lifelong value of reading, of course. Thank you also to all our participants for joining with us today. If you're already a member, you can borrow the book, The Longevity Code. We'll share the book code in chat. The book is available in our digital library now. Before we conclude, I would like to invite David back to share a few closing remarks and formally bring today's event to a close. Thank you. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Anisha.
Well, as our questioner said, Tariq, thank you for that, and thank you for describing what a privilege I feel I've had to have this rich conversation with Sophia and Gopi, and your message is so inspiring and hopeful, that we have the agency to make these small changes in our lives, to find the joy in our lives, whether it's through reading and the various practices of sleeping well, eating well, having those family and other connections, social connections, mobility and exercise. I feel that I can go on to the rest of my working day with that inspiration. For those of you in other parts of the world, you may be just waking up and having this experience over breakfast. Some people might be having dinner and going to bed. But wherever you are, thank you for joining us, and thank you again to our two speakers. It's been a really rich conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, David. Great to see you. Thanks, Anisha. And thank you, Megha, for coordinating all of this.
Thank you so much.